Hello, this is Morel Bernard with Black History Month. February 1926, a man by the name of Carter G. Woodson he launched the celebration of Negro History Week, and now we've come to know it as Black History Month. We'd like to say thank you very much to Carter G. Woodson. And in view of this, I want to read and narrate from Carter G. Woodson's work. And there was an experiment called the Port Royal experiment. So my focus here is on the Port Royal experiment. The Sea Islands of South Carolina are located between Charleston and Savannah on the Atlantic seaboard. In the group connected with the capture of Hilton Head are St. Helena, Port Royal, Morgan, Paris, and Phillips. Collectively, as a military designation, these were known as Port Royal. On these islands in 1861, there were about 9,000 slaves, the lowest in America. As laborers on the cotton and rice plantation, these slaves, for generations, had been removed from all the influences that tended to elevate the bondmen elsewhere. They were densely illiterate, superstitious, and in general, but little removed from African barbarism. To add to the general low stage of these slaves, their language was a jargon hardly understandable by those who came to teach them. For example, some of them would say, "Us ain't know nothing, and you is to larn me, larn we." Upon the capture of Hilton Head by the Federals, the white masters fled to Charleston and the upcountry and abandoned all of their property. The control of abandoned property at this time rested with the Treasury Department. Accordingly, Secretary Chase sent Edward L. Pierce of Milton, Massachusetts, to Port Royal to report on the amount of cotton and also to make recommendations for its collection and sale. The findings of Pierce, together with that of Sherman in command of the military forces, introduce us to our main story. As that the suggestion of Chase, Pierce, and Sherman sent appeals broadcast to the North for the immediate relief of the abandoned slaves. In February 1862, Sherman issued this General Order Number 9. The helpless condition of the blacks inhabiting the vast area in the occupation of the forces of this command calls for immediate action on the part of a highly favored and philanthropic people. Hordes of total, uneducated, ignorant, and improvident blacks have been abandoned by their constitutional guardians, not only to all the future chances of anarchy and starvation, but in such a state of abject ignorance and mental stolidity as to preclude all possibility of self-government and self-maintenance in their present condition. To relieve the government of a burden that may hereafter become insupportable, a suitable system of culture and instruction must be combined with one providing for their physical wants. In the meanwhile, the service of competent instructors will be received whose duty will consist in teaching them, both young and old, the rudiments of civilization and Christianity. In response to this appeal, there was organized in Boston on February the 7th, 1862, the Boston Education Commission, later known as the New England Freedmen's Aid Society or the New England Society. And on the 22nd of the same month, at a mass meeting held at the Cooper Institute in New York City, the New York National Freedmen's Relief Association was organized. At this meeting, the following rules were adopted with reference to the abandoned slaves. Number 1, they must be treated as free men. Number 2, they must earn their livelihood like other free men and not be dependent upon charity. And number 3, schools and churches shall be established among them, and the sick shall be cared for. Following in the wake of Boston and New York came Philadelphia in March, with the Port Royal Relief Committee, later known as the Pennsylvania Freedmen's Relief Association or the Pennsylvania Society. Carrying out the resolution mentioned above, there assembled on the 3rd of March 1862 at the Port of New York a party of 53 teachers and superintendents of labor, including 12 women, who set sail on the same day for Port Royal. The salaries of these persons were to be paid by their respective societies, while transportation and military protection were afforded by the United States government. Following this original party in March and April came 20 more representatives from the New England Society, and likewise added increments from New York, Philadelphia, and elsewhere all through the year. In the fall, the American Missionary Association of New York added a corps of 31 teachers. It must be remarked at this point that these individuals represented the flower of New England culture. The first party, Gideonites as they were called, was made up in part of recent graduates of Harvard, Yale, Brown, and the divinity schools of Andover and Cambridge. Furthermore, they were sent forward on their mission by William Cullen Bryant, William Lloyd Garrison, Francis G. Shaw, and Edward Everett Hale, with the sanction and close cooperation of the Secretary of the Treasurer, S.P. Chase. The voluntary steps taken by these parties attracted considerable attention and concern from the best minds of Europe as well as the United States. Articles on the subject appeared in English and French periodicals. The results of these efforts to aid and elevate the Sea Island Negroes was to be considered as an index as to their ability to learn, and likewise would indicate the possibility of general development of slaves in other states. The labors of the United States government and the societies here, therefore, came to be known as the Port Royal Experiment. The United States government and the regulation of the abandoned territory for 3 years until the close of the war underwent a number of changes. Prior to the arrival of the Gideonites on March 9th, the territory was controlled by the special cotton agent E.L. Pierce, as directed by the Treasury Department. In June, in response to congressional action, control passed to the War Department. Pierce was displaced, and Major Rufus Saxton was made the administrator with headquarters at Beaufort on Port Royal. His duties were to supervise the growth and sale of cotton, to regulate labor, to direct the activities of newcomers and settle them at suitable points over the several islands. At the same time, the military forces stationed at Hilton Head passed successively under the command of Sherman and General David Hunter. Pursuant to the Congressional Act of June 7, 1862, for the collection of direct taxes in insurrectionary states, the abandoned property was bought in by the United States government and private individuals. In September 1863, the government relinquished its purchases whereby the freedmen, as they were now called, could buy property in 20-acre lots and at the same time established school farms of 6,000 acres, the proceeds from which were to be used for educational purposes. According to the plan laid out by Pierce, the islands were divided into 4 districts which contained a total of 189 plantations. Over each district was placed a general superintendent with a local superintendent for each plantation. W.C. Gannett and John C. Sakas of the New England Society were placed in charge of the schools. School work had already begun prior to the arrival of the main party through the initiative taken by Pierce and his co-workers. On the 8th of January 1862, Reverend Solomon Peck of Roxbury, Massachusetts, established a school for the contrabands at Beaufort. Another was opened at Hilton Head by Barnard K. Lee of Boston the same month. In February, there was organized still another at Beaufort, which was taught for a short while by an agent of the American Missionary Association. In estimating what was accomplished by these preliminary disorganized efforts, we can assume that it was no more than learning the alphabet. After their arrival in March, those persons who had come in the capacity of teachers began their work immediately. By the 8th of May, there were 8 schools in operation. The impoverished school houses consisted of cotton barns, sheds or old kitchens, and praise houses. Some had classes in tents. The furniture, correspondingly, was equally as crude. The desks were mere boards thrown across old chairs. A fair idea of the general informal state of affairs both as to the time and place of teaching is gained by this recital of one teacher's experience. I leave town about 6 o'clock a.m. and arrive at the first plantation about 9 and commence teaching those too young to labor. About 11, the task is done and the field hands come in for their share. About 1 p.m., I go to the other 3 plantations, 1.5 miles. They assemble at the most central one for instruction. This lasts about 2 hours, first teaching the young, then the older persons. There being no building suitable for a school on any plantation, I teach them under the shadow of a tree, where it is more comfortable than any house could be in hot weather. In only 1 or 2 instances were there buildings erected specifically for school purposes. One interesting case is that of a building sent from the north in sections and likewise erected piece by piece. An estimate of what was done as a whole during the first year of the experiment may be made from the fact that 35,829 books and pamphlets were sent to Port Royal by northern agencies, and 3,000 scholars were put under instruction. In addition to this purely educational effort, there were distributed 91,834 garments, 5,895 yards of cloth, and $3,000 worth of farming implements and seeds. Further light on the general nature and progress of the work is gained through a return visit made by Pierce to Port Royal in March 1863. At this time, he reported that there were more than 30 schools conducted by about 40 or 45 teachers. The average attendance was 2,000 pupils and the enrollment 1,000 more. The ages range from age 8 to 12. As to the studies, the advanced classes were reading simple stories and mastered some passages in such common school books as Hillard's Second Primary Reader, Wilson's Second Reader, and others of similar grade. Some few were having elementary lessons in arithmetic, geography, and writing. A very large part of the school exercises consisted of utilizing what the teachers found the scholars endowed with by nature, an abundance of feeling as expressed in their folk songs and crude religion, an insight into their inwardly depressed condition is gained by the fact that these songs were usually cast in the minor mode, although they were sung in a joyful manner. In their lowest state, singing was the one thing they could always do well. At first they sang melody alone, but after having once been given an idea of harmony, they instantly adopted it. Their time and tone were always true. They took particular delight in ringing out "Roll, Jordan, roll." Along with the singing, the general atmosphere of the instruction was religious. Indeed, the New Testament was used as a textbook. After the pupils had learned to read a little, they were set to work learning the Psalms and the 10 Commandments. One teacher of the Port Royal group, herself of African descent, was Charlotte S. Forten of Philadelphia. She was a graduate at the State Normal School, Salem, in Massachusetts, and had taught in the same city. Refusing a residence in Europe, she joined one of the parties for Port Royal to teach among her own people. This woman enjoyed the friendship of Whittier, and as a beautiful singer herself, the poet sent her directly his hymn written for the scholars of St. Helena Island, which she taught them to sing for the Emancipation Proclamation exercises of January 1st, 1863. The Banner School on St. Helen Isles and Port Royal was the one in charge of Laura M. Town of Philadelphia and supported by the Philadelphia Society. After 3 years' work, this school had reached a fair degree of organization. The school was conducted in the building, sent in sections as referred to above, and was known as the Penn School, in honor of the society which supported it. Classes were grouped as primary, intermediate, and higher, each in charge of one teacher in a separate room. The branches of study, however, were the same in all: reading, spelling, writing, geography, and arithmetic. The situation here described represents in the embryo the present-day Penn Normal and Agriculture Institute. Similarly, well-housed was the school taught by Elizabeth Hyde Beauchamp of Boston under the auspices of the New England Society. It commands interest for the reason that it was the beginning in industrial training on these islands. As plantation laborers, the pupils knew little or nothing of sewing. To supply this need, Miss Botium solicited the necessary apparatus from her northern friends and began work on some old contraband goods stored in an arsenal. She reported that sewing was a fascination to all, and that they learned readily and soon developed much skill and ingenuity. This school has come down today as the Old Fort Plantation School. The work of these two women thus took on a permanent character, and to this extent largely formed an exception to the general informality of the schooling at Port Royal. Obviously, the heroic efforts of the several societies to assist the blacks amounted to far more than schoolroom procedure. Indeed, this was a very small part of the work of the teachers, and it was so regarded by them. They visited the little cabins, counseled and advised their wards, attended church, and taught them in the Sabbath schools. 3 years of this intermingling between the culture of New England and the most degraded slaves in America resulted in some promising signs for the latter. There was some improvement in manners and dress and an increase in wants. At the stores set up on the islands, they were buying small articles for the improvement of their surroundings. For the first time, they were now being paid wages. At the tax sales in March 1863, when 16,479 acres were up for auction, they purchased about 3,500 acres at the price of 93.5 cents an acre. Shortly afterwards, they had doubled this amount. As free laborers, however, they were somewhat disappointing to their new employers, since old habits still persisted. All in all, with some 3,000 or 1/3 of the whole number having received more or less instruction in books, the societies were well satisfied with the experiment, and at the close of the war increased their efforts at Port Royal and throughout the state. Join me. Why not? Join me for the next video. About Black history. Yeah, the Journal of Negro History. According to Carter G. Woodson. Wonderful piece of information for us to learn from. So join me, please. Join me, Morale Bernard. Join me. And please subscribe to the channel, and please share this video. So join me for the next video. I'll see you then. Okay, bye.